Welcome to EB5 Investment Voice, where attorney insights intersects with immigration investments. If you are a foreign investor, domestic fund manager, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of the EB5 program, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host, Mona Shaw, and other attorneys at Mona Shaw & Associates, as well as immigration leaders from around the world. So let's get into EB5 Investment Voice. Well, Mona, last week I know we talked about exit plans, and we were going to do a few episodes on exit plans and discover some more of the issues, and we'll get to that later in future episodes. But I know that there was a much awaited, much anticipated USCIS stakeholders call that happened this week, and you're fresh from that and have things to share with us, right?
Well, not a lot to share, actually, Mark. It was a little disappointing, right, Rebecca?
Yeah, very disappointing. Unfortunately, it's just a listen-in only session. No actual engagement between the IPO, USCIS, or with the stakeholders.
Oh, for our listeners, the IPO is the Immigrant Investor Program Office. They're the people who actually maintain, watch, do everything with EB5.
Yeah, so joining us that day, we only had Sarah Kendall, who's the chief of the IPO. She went ahead and basically kind of gave us a
rundown of the regulations, which we already know. So there's a lot of questions which had been submitted. We were disappointed that those questions weren't in. We did ask a few questions ourselves afterwards, and they were just but taken as either comments or things to consider in the future.
Exactly. So what they did is none of the questions that were sent in prior were answered. Mona, your question at least was specific, so we're hoping something comes out on that.
My question actually did refer to something which is in the regs. So the new regulations allows you to save your priority date or preserve your priority date in certain exceptions, in certain situations rather. The first being if there is the termination of a regional center or fraud, and the second being if there's a material change. So the actual regulations do state that once you get your green card, you cannot rely on the initial priority date. So my question was really, well, if you're referring to fraud, often the fraud is not found out right at the beginning. The fraud is found out later. So would they consider saving your date or priority date to a later time when you actually do find out that when the fraud actually happens after you actually get your green card? I can't really see them changing the regulations for that, but it's always a good idea to throw something out.
Yeah. So the only other point that was worth noting is how many staff members they had. As of July 2019, they had 212 staff members. But
it doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Exactly.
Right? We're still so behind. I mean, we're laughing, but this is not a laughing matter, Mark.
No, that's Parkinson's law.
Yeah. And I really felt when I had the mic, I did think for a nanosecond, should I actually be berating them? I thought, no, maybe not. It's not their fault. But they did give a reason. They gave two reasons for the adjudication delays, which in my opinion is really not a real reason. The first reason was a government shutdown, whereby they were working. They said they pivoted to 829 cases and standalone cases. But did we really see evidence of that?
Yeah, I was going to say we did not see hardly anything that came through. We have plenty of direct cases.
We got one. We got one.
Yeah, we haven't seen I-829s being processed quickly either.
The other really telling point, which was one of those comments which was laced in underlying ahas, was that members were, quote, temporarily assigned to other agency priorities, unquote. That's where we're thinking, like, really, are they all out fixing the border wall or something? Mm-hmm. But, it was across the board. I felt like there was this real sort of mood of despondency amongst the EB5 community. And I just wish that the IPO and USCIS understood just how much the EB5 program is bringing in to the country.
Yeah, exactly. And what I think everyone was disappointed is that there was actually no solutions to this. Like, why, with the adjudication taking so long, what are they doing? With 212 staff members, we should be processing things faster now.
I know. Well, we still live in hope. There's lots of good things happening. Mark, we're not discussing today, but we do have a little discussion coming up at some point about the latest as to what's going on with the legislation, and a little bit of an update, if there is an update on the regs. So we'll try and keep our listeners up to date on all of those. But today, what we decided, I'm going to hand the mic over to Rebecca today, because we thought that with all of the emphasis on November 21st filings, the folks out there could do with some help with source of funds issues.
Yes, we didn't get any light shed on anything new coming out on November 21st. So we're going to discuss how we can help our clients who are rushing to file before this deadline.
Right. So, Mark, today we've heard from Hermione on our show before. Of course, Rebecca's a regular person with yourself and myself. But we're also bringing on another one of the MSA team, somebody who has a lot of experience, especially in the Indian cases. And her name is Shagufta.
So we have a very experienced team with us here today, Mark.
Well, you always have a very experienced team there every day. We just happen to have 4 of you on this episode. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
As we're heading into our November 21st deadline, we want to caution investors who are going out there. November 21st is not the actual deadline. Am I correct, Hermione?
Yeah, definitely. Because November 21st is when USCIS has to receive your petition. Meaning that you basically have to file your cases way beforehand to ensure that USCIS receives the package.
Exactly. So November 21st is when the actual rules go into effect. So any cases that are being filed with USCIS on that day potentially can go up to the 900,000 or 1.8 million.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they have to be in, we're saying to our clients, at least November 20th or we suggest before that. So we're saying rush filings because I think a lot of our investors have this misconception that source of funds are easy.
Yeah, we hear that quite a lot. Like, they just come to us saying that, it's only going to take you a day or so, or less than a day to actually figure everything out because everything's already in my bank account. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We've heard so many times when, investors just tell us, my source is so easy. But it turns out they have multiple sources.
Yeah, and Shagufta, she could tell you tons of stories of how many investors that come in and tell her that, I have, they'll say, I have tax returns, and you think that's it. So we want to stress again. I know we discussed this on one of our previous recordings when the regulations first came out about skeletal filings. And we really, really want to emphasize this again. What happened is that USCIS back in July of 2018 did come out with a new policy memo where they were going to it was in their discretion to go ahead and deny any cases that they didn't think came with all the required evidence. The specific language itself actually says that it was effective September 11, 2018. USCIS adjudicators will have full discretion to deny any application without first issuing an RFE or a NOID if all required initial evidence is not submitted. Now, Hermione, that word all is very important, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, of course, once they have the full discretion, you can see from the language itself, it sounds quite subjective of what is actually considered all required evidence. Investors and, of course, their filing attorneys have to be very careful when they are delivering the entire package to USCIS to ensure that all the evidence is there so that there is no chance, if there is anything that is deficient, then there's no chance even for them to actually correct the mistake.
Exactly. And so with this, Hermione, we're a bit nervous because I know the new regulations have, the retention of priority dates.
Yeah.
But if someone's source of funds is denied right off the bat, does that allow them to retain priority date?
Marina briefly mentioned earlier that there are 2 scenarios where you can get your priority date retention. The first one is fraud or your regional center gets terminated. And the second one is material change, meaning it's only the project side that is out of your control, meaning force majeure, then that can allow you to have your priority date retention. Meaning, if your source of funds has anything wrong, then you really have no chance to actually get your priority date retained.
Exactly. So there's no fraud, there's no misrepresentation by the project. So that's why we're stressing, again, investors not to, just don't throw anything in there. It's really important to seek experienced attorneys who know what they're doing, what evidence needs to be required. incomplete, shabby petitions are no longer going to be accepted by USCIS. And I mean, we ourselves heard this from the IPO office during a conference that we held back in November 2017. They said, half of this was because of the 2015 rush filings that people were just throwing just the application in, the petition.
Yeah, just the form itself.
Yeah, exactly. So none of that is going to happen. And this deadline is real. The funds are going up. It's not another one where they're going to extend it again. This is actually happening. So we need to make sure petitions are filed.
Yeah, now we do see investors thinking that, the concept of the new regulation has sunk in. Like previously, we actually received quite a lot of calls or requests saying, oh, maybe it will not happen. Like it's just, regulation, because we've cried wolf so many times. So a lot of investors don't believe it anymore, but this time it is real.
Yes. That being said, everybody's, needs to make sure that they're filing petitions that are complete and accurate. So now I want to go into discussing a bit more about the actual sources and what USCIS is looking for. Now, it's not going to be a full discussion in every source, but we just want to hit some of the important parts that we've seen. We don't want to discuss too much about this, but a little bit about, is USCIS going to accept partial filings?
Okay, so we know in the statute itself, the investor must establish that he or she has invested or is actively in the process of investing. The second part, actively in the process of investing, seems to suggest that partial filing is permissible. And then the regulation itself also basically reiterates the same concept, but then actually has a really narrow interpretation of the statute itself, saying that you basically have to show irrevocable commitment. You can't simply show a mere intent to invest, and that is not basically sufficient itself. And then the new regulation also only mentions one explicit example of when partial filing, basically when we are thinking about the concept, is allowed, which is the escrow scenario. So the language itself is a little bit unclear on whether it is, how much you can contribute and then how you can actually do it.
Yeah. So just as much as the regulations, everything is pretty much vague and unclear. So with the partial filings, we urge the investors, look, this is not something easily said or can be done. We do have to look into each case and see what can be filed. Yeah. Can this be filed partially? How much time do we have? And right now we don't have enough time. So we urge investors to really speak to your attorneys and see what's going on. Now, I want to jump into Shagufta. With a lot of our clients, we're seeing a lot of Indian clients who are coming in, and everyone's scrambling to file before this November 21st deadline. What have you been seeing with a lot of your investors?
Right. Like you say, the word scrambling, they are scrambling. Yeah, because we're seeing multiple sources. Of course, nobody has just the investment funds lying around. But yes, there are multiple sources. They have funds tied up in assets, investments, and they are liquidating, they are selling, they are getting gifts. So yeah, there are multiple sources, like for example, employment income, business income, sale of business, sale of assets, liquidating assets, gifts from family and friends. Basically, what they need to know is that if they are using multiple sources, it's not just your tax returns that show that, okay, I've made so much money and that's it. That's not it. We have to go all the way back to the seed funds.
I completely agree. And then another misconception which we often see is that investors come to us thinking that they can only count heads. Meaning if for example, they are getting a gift from a family friend, and then this family friend has multiple sources which actually finally contributes to this gift. And they think that is considered one source because it's only from this one particular friend. Unfortunately, that's not the case. No matter how many friends, even if it's just one, so long as you have multiple sources, that's considered multiple.
Yeah. So what we do is we're seeing this a lot now especially with our Indian investors, because their cash is tied up in assets. Yeah. So no one's going to have just random 500,000 sitting around. So they have to go ahead and, decide what they're going to do. Or do they have enough time right now to sell their property? I mean, in India, it takes forever.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we help our investors, look, you tell us what you have. We could come up with alternative sources. We ourselves are not there to come up with that, but we can suggest, look, if you have friends or family who can gift, who can loan,
Yeah.
if there's easier ways, easier process. I mean, some of our clients are coming out with 20,000 for one source. We're saying, look, if you can consolidate 20, 50, 100,000 into one source, it makes it easier for USCIS to go through, review the documents, and, makes it easier on just for us to source it because we have such limited time.
And the fluctuation in currency, especially India, is causing some issues. So, yeah, it is doable, definitely doable, but we definitely need cooperation from the clients to put this petition together.
Yes. So we don't say to just sit there and wait and do your source of funds at the same time you're going to file or transfer the funds. We say work on your source of funds now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is important. They have to understand this. It's not just the project part. It's a 2-part petition, and the source of funds plays a very important role in putting the document together, explaining all the documents in a proper manner so that it is easy for the officer to understand.
Yeah, definitely. I often say to my investors, if you stand in USCIS adjudicator's shoes and they see 20 sources, would they be that willing to actually, or that passionate about adjudicating your cases? Probably not, right?
Exactly.
So,
it looks like as if they're selling the shirt of their back to, just come to the US.
yeah, I've seen on Shagufta, Rebecca, they've all seen like people just pulling $3,000 from one particular source, and they are really scrambling. See, yes.
Yeah. I say overall it just hinders the case. And then your case is going to end up taking longer to get adjudicated. Yeah. And you're an investor. So other topics that we get questions on are loans and gifts. We're not saying one's better than the other, but for some, as many people have known, that we need collateral against a loan. So Hermione, can you explain to us a bit of, some of the changes we've seen throughout the year with the new case that came out with loans?
Yeah, so there's a new precedent case called Zhang on USCIS, and this case really changed the dynamic of the EB5 industry. Previously, there was a 2015 policy remark by USCIS saying that unsecured loans are not allowed, basically. And then after this Zhang decision, which happened on November the 30th, 2018, the U.S. District of Columbia's judge basically said that USCIS's ruling was capricious, so unsecured loans are allowed. After this, we did get quite a lot of inquiries on, trying to be very creative, basically. Trying to think, now I can get unsecured loans, and then it really opens the door. I wouldn't say the floodgate, but it really opens the door for a lot of investors.
Yeah, but we do err on the side of caution.
Yes.
Because this is something new. USCIS have, of course, denied a lot of cases in the past regarding loans that were unsecured.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, we have a new case that came out. USCIS is fluctuating on how they're seeing this. So we say that, look, you have to be very careful on what you're doing with this.
And then potentially there might be certain other legal disputes regarding unsecured loans, especially when it comes to a personal loan. Say you get a loan from your family or your friends. Because unsecured loans don't have a collateral, usually if you're getting an unsecured loan from a bank, then at least they can use a credit score to show that, okay, so in case of a default, you can use wages to garnish that. But if there's a loan between your family and friends, then what is there to make sure you do pay them back? And then if you do not, and then say, I wouldn't say disgruntled or anything, but then they might potentially sue you. And your assets, which might consider your personal property, which you might already use for EB5, can be potentially seized. And this can basically open a can of worms, and you do not want to go into that muddy water area, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Rebecca, we do a lot of gifts, like parents and siblings and friends. But are there any tax consequences?
So that I want to emphasize that we are not tax attorneys. So we do ask that any investors who are going through gifts or have any tax questions, you do seek your, for instance, in India, you speak with your chartered accountant. Here in the U.S., you speak to your CPA. But briefly, U.S. does have tax laws on their gifts. There is a limit, and you have to speak with your CPA to know where, how much can you gift, and when will you be able to what's called a lifetime gift. So that we're not going to get into because, again, we're not tax attorneys, but there is something that you can invoke to be able to gift friends and family over the limited amount of $14,000. For India, for example, because we have a lot of cases coming out of India right now, between family members, especially parents and children, there is no gift tax. But again, we do suggest that you talk to your chartered accountant.
Yeah.
Some of the other questions we're having, again, is currency restrictions. You know, India, as we said, has a limit of 250,000.
Yeah. So every country, they have their own financial market and exchange control. When it comes to India, there is 250,000 US dollars per individual per annual year. That's the limit. These restrictions in India, let's say if we take India, for example, they are governed by the RBI and they fall under the FEMA Act. And within that, there is a scheme which is called which is LRS, which is Liberalized Remittance Scheme. Now, under this, what they've done is they've made it easy. If you are remitting 250, you don't need permission. Of course, there is paperwork and stuff to be done, but the 250 there are certain processes, certain things that are purposes that are listed under it, and EB5 falls under that. Like generally people give out gifts or, they put as purchasing shares. So it does fall under that. You don't need permission for that. And if you go to a bank which understands wiring big sum, they will guide you through. But if there are people who go to small boutique banks and it gets difficult, then we've had both kinds of cases where, people have done it and within hours the money is transferred. But there are some who come back saying that, no, we've been told this is not possible. That's incorrect. It is possible under the LRS scheme. It is possible to transfer the money.
Shagufta, we are seeing changes as well, right? Previously, the bank doesn't really require subscription documents. Now we are seeing quite a lot of investors telling us that the bank requires subscription documents, meaning the offering documents, to actually allow the parts of funds to go through.
Right. Like it is changing. There are things added on, but like when they are saying that it is being invested, so the bank does ask them for such documents. Which is fine. Yeah. But there are people who say that they have to get some kind of electronic number and it is taking a month. That is incorrect.
Yeah. So it is getting certain banks are making it a little more difficult and having to transfer the funds over. Yep. But as Shagufta said, there's no real issue in being able to.
Yeah. And it is always a good idea. Like we said, these things can be done simultaneously, like the project, the source of funds. In the same way, you go to your bank, you talk to them beforehand to understand the process. And if they understand the process so that this is done smoothly.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we want to also focus on is that, look, not just your source of funds is important for this petition. Your path of funds are just as important. We always say source of funds for the EB5 petitioner side of the application, but USCIS wants to see where every single penny is being moved. Yeah. Right? So you can't just say, oh, I earn $160,000 a year. That could be a source, but you don't have $160,000. You use that fund. Yeah. So you have to actually show to USCIS as well, where is all your funds being moved to?
Yeah. Proper document evidence is important. And one of the questions that we always come across is, do I have to move the funds into the project, or when do I move? Yes. So.
Yeah, we always get asked this question. Like, investors come to us thinking they don't need to transfer the funds before they submit their 526 petition. And that is incorrect. You have to. Like previously when we said that you have to show irrevocable commitment, like you show you've invested or in the process of investing. So meaning that money has to be in the bank account. Otherwise, how can you show investment?
Exactly. What we usually do is that we make sure all the sources are sourced, the path of funds are correct, and then at once we just tell the investor to go ahead and wire the funds to the project's escrow account or their account and then go from there. Now, I just want to finish this up and just say that some RFEs, like what are we seeing? What are some of the trends that are coming out right now? Hermione, I know we've had a lot with minors.
Yes. So the minor issue is actually not super new. We started seeing that back in 2017 or 2018. That was the first batch when we received RFEs, requests for evidence notices from USCIS on minor investors. Basically, USCIS is saying because they are minors, so their contracts can be voidable. And then there's a way to deal with this. And then we have a lot of successes battling this. And we've seen approvals based on our arguments.
Yeah. So if there are any minors out there, again, speak to the attorney.
Yeah.
Make sure that everything is filed correctly. Now, as we said, we haven't seen much adjudication of cases. But what I think what USCIS is doing, and this is wholeheartedly my opinion, is that I think they're trying to catch up now. And so what I think they're doing is that they're sending long and extensive RFEs just so that way they can put a case on hold. Yeah. Some of these RFEs that we are seeing are like either evidence have already been submitted.
Yeah.
You know, they're asking unnecessary questions at times. So that's my opinion.
I completely agree. Mark, you know, we get co-counseling requests all the time. So we see quite a lot of RFEs, like even recently.
Exactly.
And then USCIS is requesting not only like what Rebecca just said, the same documents you originally already submitted in the I-526 petition, but also in their RFE notice itself, they put on this super long list of documents which appears just to be copied and pasted directly from a template or a manual. I do agree with Rebecca on this point, and I do feel they are trying to catch up. And then in the light of time, they are trying to just, I don't know, smooth things around or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are hoping that USCIS with their 212 staff members somehow catch up and things will go smoothly. Make sure there's no skeletal filings. I think that's going to end up being worse and push the adjudication times further back.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we've got a full room. We've got Mona, Rebecca, Hermione, Shagufta. So many voices, both familiar and new, that I was happy to stand back. Thanks for all of you joining us and talking and sharing some of your insight, especially with source of funds and these other issues. You've done over 1,000 EB-5 petitions and all these filings. So to have all this experience in one room and discuss it is really eye-opening. And I hope that the 212 new adjudicators, that's the same boiling temperature as water. Yeah, I'm sure there's no correlation there.
Go full steam ahead.
Yeah.
Exactly. Full steam ahead. Woo.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you for being with us today on EB-5 Investment Voice. The topics presented in this podcast is informational in nature and is not to be taken as specific legal advice. If you have questions on the topics presented in this episode or other investment immigration needs, please contact Mona Shaw and Associates. Mona and her attorney staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com. That's mshawlaw.com. Make sure you don't miss our next episode focusing on a different aspect of the EB-5 program by subscribing to the podcast. While you're at it, leave us a rating on iTunes. If you really found this episode valuable, share it with someone else that could benefit from this information. Until then, I'll see you on the next episode of EB-5 Investment Voice.